The end is the beginning. We finally gotten to the beginning of the end of this first batch of Star Trek Picard episodes. And also the beginning of the end of Picard's final storyline. Yeah, there's a lot of beginning and endings going on in here. Hello interwebs and welcome to my review of Star Trek Picard Episode 3, The End is the Beginning. I think that this episode was a marked improvement over last episode, Episode 2. While I did enjoy Episode 2, I do think it got really bogged down in trying to give us a lot of info dumps, a lot of exposition. And while this episode does have that in certain bits and pieces, and even does it a little bit in a more muddled way than I think Episode 2 did, where Episode 3 really shines and where I think it really makes it stand out and work a lot better is that it gives me time to focus on all the new characters. Every new character in this episode got a little small scene that really subtly showed me their character. It didn't necessarily beat me over the head with their character, but just allowed me a moment to latch on to each individual character. And I realized by the end of the episode, when we got all of our characters gathered together, that I really loved each and every one of them. I understand each character, how their personality works, what baggage they've started to carry, at least got hints of it, and understood what their dynamic was with Picard, and also understood what their dynamic might be with other characters. And I think that that speaks to how strongly this show has been written so far. As much as I love Star Trek Discovery, it took me a little bit of time to really latch onto and fall in love with those characters on that show. Probably about the middle of Season 1 towards later in Season 1. But here, almost every character feels spot on, and it feels like every actor has really nailed who these characters are. Like, for example, Rios was someone that I just met this episode, but I really got a sense that he is that wisecracking captain who can be funny, kind of like roguish. But he has a little bit more baggage than we see most characters of this type actually carrying. Like, for example, to contrast him with another Trek character, I see a lot of Tom Paris in Rios. But whereas Tom Paris kind of aired a little bit more on the wisecracking kind of funny guy, Rios definitely has a lot of that, but he definitely carries a lot more of the burden on his shoulders than Paris ever did. Even though they kind of functionally have similar elements to their background of being like ex-Starfleet officers. I think Rios is sort of the flip side of the Tom Paris coin, as it were. And I really got that sense just from the small scenes that I got with Rios. And I also love all the other characters, my personal favorite being Laris. I just absolutely adore her as that sort of Romulan character. I think she's funny, she's witty, but she also has a deep sense of caring and connection with Picard that comes through even in a 2-minute, not even 2-minute scene. And it's just so well performed, so well acted. I think it's truly wonderful. And yes, I think there are a few things here and there in this episode between a little bit of telling and not showing in a couple moments, and a little bit of confusing, muddled exposition, especially when it came to the stuff on the Borg cube. I got a little bit lost in what exactly it was trying to tell me or show me or set up in those scenes. Didn't really quite work for me. But everything on Earth and everything with the new characters just really got me instantly hooked and really excited to go on an adventure with these people, so that when we finally got to the end of the episode, I'm like, yes, I am so ready to just fall in love more with each and every one of these characters. And so I think that as the concluding chapter to this opening, I thought it was fantastic. And also a little spoiler here for those of you who don't want any spoilers, I was also surprised we didn't get any Riker and Troy in this episode. I kind of figured they would be on Earth and that we would see them at some point in this episode. So I'm actually kind of excited and surprised that they're being held for a later date. And I'm curious to see when they show up, because I thought that they were going to be in a scene where it's like, oh, Riker's going to be like, yeah, Picard, you go out and you do that thing. You get excited and energized and you go. Riker was going to be the one to like kind of pick Picard up. So I'm surprised that that didn't happen this episode, and I'm curious when they're gonna show back up. So yeah, that's my initial thoughts on this episode, that's spoiler-free, but let's get into the nitty-gritty spoilers of this episode, and I'll kind of do a quick scene-by-scene breakdown of the episode. So first off, we get a flashback scene to 14 years ago, right after the destruction of Mars by the rogue synths. And we get to see Picard and Rafi have a scene together that really kind of shows us how their relationship initiated. We get to see that these two were characters that really knew how to work together, had a very trusting, close bond. And it's something that we saw in the comic Star Trek Picard, but I thought that this scene portrayed where the relationship was very well, with Rafi instantly coming out and was like, yeah, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. And you got to see that that felt like a normal dynamic for the two of them. But then her instantly being able to read Picard and sense that something was wrong. And I also just loved her familiarity with him, that she called him JL. That's a very subtle character moment that just shows how familiar she is and how close she is with Picard. And I liked how when she started showing concern for Picard, she called him Jean-Luc, not JL. Just expertly written, like, small, subtle character beats in these scenes to really flesh out these characters and their relationship with each other. Just fantastically done. And I really liked how this scene showed me the connecting tissue from where Rafi and Picard were in their relationship of people who could work together and worked well together and were close to each other, to where they eventually become in the present day, where Rafi really is angry at Picard. You see it in this moment of Rafi feeling hurt that Picard's supposed to be this man that always does the right thing, always fights to the bitter end, and his last desperate play was to retire. And I could see her feeling anger at that, at feeling that Picard betrayed her because he just washed his hands of all responsibility. He just said, you know what, I can't change them, there's nothing more I can do, and I'm just gonna walk away. And I understand Picard feeling that that's what he had to do at that moment, but I also understand her anger. And I think what this show is just doing so well is it's not allowing me to perfectly side with one person or the other. I understand Rafi, I understand Picard in this moment, just as I understand the Federation and I understand the Romulans' plight in the last episode, with sort of the difference in opinion between, like, Picard and the Admiral. And I just really like that sense of moral ambiguity in here, where I don't really think anyone's fully right or fully wrong, but I completely understand their emotional reactions to the scene. So I just really loved this connective tissue with Rafi and Picard. I think this scene just perfectly encapsulated, showing us where they were and how they got to where they are. Speaking of getting to where they are, we cut to the scene in the present day at Vasquez Rocks with Picard visiting Rafi. Which, by the way, I guess Rafi just lives at Vasquez Rocks. That feels a little bit of a on-the-nose Trek reference, that she literally just lives at Vasquez Rocks, but you know what, I can deal with it. And also, she has a future vape. Apparently people are still vaping, that hasn't been completely banned in the future, so there's your politics in this episode. But seriously, I just thought it was funny that she actually smoked a vape. While I did enjoy this scene between Rafi and Picard in the present day, I especially liked the bit where Rafi says, you know, you're only coming to me because you need me. You never checked up on me. You never made sure I was okay, and I was not okay. And it kind of goes back to that whole thing of Picard kind of washing his hands of the whole situation. And I liked that that was playing out in a personal level between Picard and Rafi, as well as the macro level of, like, him leaving Starfleet because he just couldn't change the Federation. It really drove home both, like, the macro and micro levels of Picard sort of washing his hands of responsibility. However, I do think that this scene told a little bit too much and didn't show. Rafi just kind of, like, tells us that, yeah, I got addicted to stuff, yeah, I was kind of dealing with a lot of personal problems. It doesn't really show us that she was dealing with it. It just kind of is told to us, and I wish we had kind of found a more elegant way to do that. Like, maybe she had, I don't know, drug marks on her. Maybe that would be too egregious for Star Trek, but just something to make us understand that with just a little bit more subtle ways, because the rest of the episode just excellently did subtle character beats, so it felt a little egregious that this scene didn't do that as well. Now, here's where we cut to the Borg cube, but I'm going to save the stuff on the Borg cube for the end of this review, just because it was the most confusing and most kind of intercut. It felt like just one sort of scene that was just spread out throughout the episode. So I'll just talk about all the Borg stuff at the end and kind of go through all the Picard stuff up front on Earth. So the next Rafi and Picard scene was Picard and Rafi talking, and Picard actually apologizing to her. And I liked that moment that he was able to get past his ego. Because one of the things that this series has shown so far is that Picard is relying a lot on his stature and his, like, I'm a very important person, and then kind of being smacked down, like when he retired from Starfleet, and then when he came in the last episode and asked, Starfleet for, I want a ship, I want to be a captain, I want to do all these things. It's showing us that Picard has a bit of a self-importance to him. I mean, he always kind of has. I mean, the dude literally goes around quoting, like, book stuff. That book stuff, look at me. I don't know where I was going with that. But Picard always kind of had a sort of self-importance about him that's kind of getting smacked down here, and I think I like that because it's kind of playing off the audience expectations. All of us are like, yeah, Picard, you're the best, and I like that the world doesn't necessarily treat him that way. Picard kind of has to deal with that, so I kind of liked him apologizing to Rafi, finally being someone to be like, I'm sorry, because that's not something we would have seen the Picard of years ago in Encounter at Farpoint doing. And I just really like the chemistry between those two actors. And we also learned that Rafi has evidence that Starfleet was the one that caused the rogue synths, because I liked that beat, and I brought this up in my review last episode, so I'm glad that they addressed it here in this one, is it couldn't have been the Tal Shiar that attacked the fleet at Utopia Planitia, because why would the Romulans, or even the Zhat Vash for that matter, attack a fleet that was there to help the Romulans? It would have made no sense, so it would have had to have been something else. And I like this idea that maybe Starfleet was the one that did it, and that there was a cover-up. And I like Rafi kind of having that conspiracy theory mind. I think it'll be a bit too easy if that's actually what ends up being the case, but it is interesting that they're sort of like pulling up this question of who led the rogue synth attack. Then we get a quick scene with Dr. Girardi eating a sandwich at the Daystrom Institute, and then Commander O wearing the snazziest sunglasses I've ever seen a Romulan/Vulcan spy wear, and coming up and asking her about Picard. Yeah, the sunglasses were, they were definitely a choice, weren't they? I don't know why the costume designers decided to put the sunglasses on her. Maybe there'll be a story reason. It was just very, very odd. Very odd to see a Vulcan with sunglasses. Maybe it's most logical to protect your eyesight.
They see me rolling, they hate it.
Then we get a scene where Picard just calls Rafi up and says, hey Rafi, you're already looking up stuff? Well, here's all the information. I kind of figured you'd be doing that, and her kind of resisting that. Again, I just liked that small little character piece that shows their dynamic together, that they kind of understand each other really well, even if they have been sort of estranged for the past few years. It's just, again, small, subtle character beats that I think just really showed relationship and built character in a way that just felt very, very, very well written, I guess is the best way to put it. Then we get Picard going up to this ship and meeting our new captain-type character, Rios. And like I said, I really liked Rios in the scene. You kind of got a sense that he is the jokey, kind of roguish character, but has a little bit more weight to him. And I loved that Picard was instantly able to read him and say, you're Starfleet through and through. I know you, and I can see that you kind of hide that, but you are someone who is very meticulous, very, very Starfleet. And I loved that sort of ability of Picard to read this guy and read another fellow captain just instantaneously. And I have to ask the question, and I'll jump to a further scene. I liked the relationship between Rios and his EMH. Also, I like to call it to the a new version of the emergency medical hologram in this. Rios tried to hide that he talks with his EMH and relies on his EMH a little bit more. We get the sense Rios just says, oh, he's just an EMH, and we get the EMH saying just. And you kind of get a read in that moment that maybe there's a little bit more to this relationship between the two of them than they're letting on. And also it plays into that theme throughout the rest of the series that we start to dehumanize non-organic life forms. We've seen it with the Borg, we've seen it with the synths and Daj, Data, and Soji, and now we're kind of getting a little bit of a hint of it with the EMH, that they're kind of being belittled and dehumanized. But I liked that later on in the scene between Rios and the EMH, that it shows that the EMH is, just like the EMH in Voyager, is someone who has a full personality, is someone who is, in many ways, possibly sentient, and possibly has a right to be considered a full human. And I think that they're setting up this EMH character to show us that, hey, there's another type of life form, holograms, that are just as worthy of being seen as people. And I think that that's what this Rios-EMH relationship is showing us. Also, I wasn't entirely sure, but I think the EMH is actually just a copy of Rios, that the actor is just playing both characters. And I really like that spoke to his isolation as a character, that he's just someone who is just so isolated that he makes copies of himself and only talks to himself. And also just a fun way to get the actor to play different versions and playing with different accents, and clearly just having a lot of fun in the multiple roles. I also really loved the beat on the bridge where Picard is asked to sit down, and Picard sort of looks at the captain's chair and then walks by it. Such a really great, again, small, subtle character moment that really shows us where Picard's at, that he doesn't feel like he's ready or able to become the captain again. Again, just so many great, subtle character moments throughout this. I'm going to be saying that over and over and over again throughout this review, but just fantastic ways to show us character. Then we go back to Chateau Picard with Picard and Laris talking, and I really liked this scene because it had echoes of even something in Star Trek Nemesis, and something that we've seen throughout Picard's character, that he never felt like he belonged at Chateau Picard, and that he always kind of had his eyes looking up at the stars, that he never really belonged to Earth. And I like that Laris was able to draw that out of Picard in this scene, that Laris doesn't want Picard to leave, that she really wants to keep him there to keep him safe, but that Picard just really, he can't. He doesn't belong to Chateau Picard. He doesn't belong on Earth. And really showed us the caring that they have for each other and the ability that they have to disagree, but to understand and to recognize the differences in each other and recognize what each other has to do. It just really sold that these characters have a deep relationship. Again, this episode's doing a wonderful job of just showing dynamics and showing relationships of characters that we've never seen together on screen up until 2 episodes ago. And also feeding into the Picard that we've always known. We've always known that Picard was never someone who felt comfortable on Earth. Then we get a really cool action scene. I really like the opening of it with Zhaban coming out and being like, here, I want to help you and take care of you. And then the action scene is going, they instantly go into like, oh, badass, we're going to beat the crap out of people mode. And just a really cool action scene. Really, again, use the action to show characters that they can go from like caring to attack in an instant. I also should say the entire time during this fight scene, I was really, really scared that Laris or Zhaban was going to be killed. I'm just going to say it right here. If Laris dies, I riot and quit this show. Laris is my favorite. If she dies, I'm done. Obviously just a joke, but don't kill Laris, please. Please don't kill Laris. And also with the Alison Pill doctor character, how she kills a Romulan and gets really upset that she hurt and killed somebody. It was a little bit weird that she kind of just showed up at the right moment, a little bit convenient, but I'm willing to forgive it because it led to such a great character telling moment that she does not feel comfortable killing anybody, but is able to do it if she needs to protect others. Then we get an interrogation scene that's intercut with the Borg interrogation scene. I'll talk about that in a second, but the interrogation scene didn't really tell us anything new. It just sort of showed that they're like, they view Daj and Soji as the destroyer for some reason, kind of building up that like the Zhat Vash have some sort of thing against synths in this, and then he brutally kills himself with the same pill that the other Romulan used in episode 1, but seeing him disintegrate like that was pretty intense, actually. It was kind of gross and a bit weirdly graphic for Star Trek. I know Star Trek's been getting more and more graphic, but I was like, ooh, that was actually the one that kind of hit me the most, even more than like the synths last episode killing people on Mars. Like that one was like really kind of gruesome. But he really didn't give us much more information besides building out that, the Romulans have a thing against synths. I also loved Alison Pill's, I keep calling her Alison Pill because I forget the doctor's name. I like the character a lot, but for some reason her name isn't sticking in my head as much as like the actress's name, Alison Pill. But I liked her speech being like, I'm coming with you because this is who I am. And Picard just kind of like smiling, being like, yeah, of course you can come. It was a great little beat, again, showed us her character in that moment. And then when we finally got onto the ship with Rios, I just enjoyed seeing the dynamic between all of the characters, starting to like get a sense that this is going to be our crew moving forward. Like Rios saying like, I'm very expensive. And Rafi kind of being like, this is the person you're bringing with Alison Pill, and Alison Pill being like, this is the person you trust. It was just good to start seeing these little pieces of dynamics and where there's like funny beats, but also where there's going to be tension between these characters moving forward. And I think that just, again, instantly just shows us really quickly and easily how these characters are all going to jump off of each other. And we also get Rafi saying she wants to go to this, I'm assuming a gambling planet. Didn't really say it. It was kind of implied that this is where Bruce Maddox is. It's a gambling planet, and for some reason Rafi wants to go there. I'm assuming we'll learn more about her like drug addiction and gambling addiction in this. And I know some people are probably going to have a problem in this, that Rafi says at some point, like, oh, you have your big chateau and I have my small little tiny thing. And people were running like, isn't it a socialist utopia where anyone can kind of exist and have wherever they want to live? In which case, and that's actually a weird thing that I have. I thought that this was a sort of Federation utopia where like, if you want a bunch of land, you can go get a bunch of land. But who knows? That's getting into Trekonomics, and I'm not an expert on that right now at like 3 a.m. when I'm doing this review. But I'm sure that that's going to be a point of contention for some people out there. Which, I think it is legitimate, this discussion of property and who owns property in the future, and is Picard actually a rich jerk? And shouldn't we have moved beyond money at this point? But, whatever. It's a small, subtle thing. So the one part of this episode that didn't work for me, and I'm sorry that I'm going to be ending on a little bit of a negative, was all the Borg stuff going on in this episode. I like seeing Hugh again. I thought Jonathan Del Arco did a great job returning to that character, kind of playing him a little bit, I don't want to say sinisterly, but a little bit kind of a darker hint and edge to him. He doesn't come across as overtly friendly. He kind of has a little bit of like a distanced edge to him. It was a good continuation of Hugh's character from The Next Generation. Then we sort of meet these Romulans who were the last Romulans. We learned that they were the last Romulans assimilated, and then something happened on the Borg ship. So there's probably something to do with them being the last ship assimilated, that maybe these Romulans that were assimilated caused the Borg ship to malfunction in some way. Maybe they were trying to attack synths, because again, maybe they were Zhat Vash assassins. And we also get a sense that Soji has a goal, has a mission here that she's not telling everybody, that maybe doesn't even know herself, considering that she didn't seem to realize that she knew this information until she actually said it. But she seems to have a mission here, that she's trying to learn something about these Romulans, and maybe the Zhat Vash in general, that not everyone is sure about. So I'm very curious to see where this goes, because it's very much getting a sense that Soji, whether she realizes it or not, has an ulterior motive. And so does Narek, quite obviously. And so do maybe the Romulans that were assimilated on the ship. So I'm very curious to see how all these secret agendas are going to be playing out. And I liked some small beats, like we learned that the Romulans have a false door, so you have to like sit behind them to sort of get her to recognize you. And that the Romulans sort of have a myth of, seeing people as the destroyer, that this is, again, it kind of gets muddled. I'm not entirely sure what it's trying to say necessarily, and this is why I don't love it as much, because I'm just kind of confused. It's like Soji saying that the Romulans have a mythology, but the mythology to them is very real, and maybe Soji plays into this mythology as the destroyer, but I don't really have a context for that in any real sense. Yeah, all this like mythology building of the Romulan background in the Zhat Vash hasn't really coalesced for me, and while I am getting hints of the larger narrative at play, like Soji having an ulterior motive and Narek kind of like trying to get information out of Soji by having her fall in love with him, it all just reads as kind of muddled at the moment, and I'm hoping it crystallizes a little bit more further on down the road in the series, because right now it's just a bit confusing, and I don't really have a strong grasp of where everything sits, and not in a good way, in a I'm kind of confused sort of way. So I'm hoping that gets a little bit cleared up in the next few episodes, because otherwise I'm going to just be very lost in that. So maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm the only one that's gotten a little bit lost in the sort of the background going on there, but for me it's just not entirely clear. I also didn't really like that when Soji was sort of like worried and confused, Narek just sort of leans over and says, "I love you," as if that like fixes her like stress problem, and it seems to work. She does seem to get over her stress instantly by him saying that he loves her. It just felt a little bit too quick. I don't really buy their love relationship. I don't mind them having like a fling and then kind of developing over time, but it just feels a bit too quick for her to be falling into that. Again, maybe that's just like she's in a stressful place, he's the person there for her, so maybe she falls for him quickly in that sense, but it just reads a bit forced for me, for the writers to try and get us from one place to another. So that's my overall thoughts on this episode. I really think the stuff on Earth was phenomenal. I think it really showed us these characters in a really intriguing way. We had very subtle, very well-drafted character writing throughout the entire episode. And the only negatives that I really have is that some of the Borg stuff and some of the more plot and conspiracy-driven content in this episode got a little bit muddled for me, but I'm hoping that it kind of reveals itself a little bit more as the episodes go on. But in what I think is probably more important for any Star Trek show, the characters, they are nailing that on almost every single level in this episode. So I'm just really excited that we're finally getting off Earth at the end of this episode, and we're finally heading out into space and really getting into the meat of this adventure, it seems. So just very excited to see where Star Trek Picard is going from here. But what did you think? Did you like episode 3? Did you hate it? Did you think the things that I loved, you hated, or did you hate what I loved? I'd love to hear all of that down in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more of my Star Trek Picard reviews or more of my analyses of Trek and different elements of pop culture through a geek lens. And if you want to help make these videos even better, please consider giving to my Patreon page. It really helps me pay the bills, helps me pay the rent, buy new equipment, helps me pay for an upcoming surgery that I have. But regardless of if you subscribe or give to my Patreon, I'm just very glad that you stopped by, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. And special thanks to my commander level and above Patreons: Stefan Schuhart, BBD, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Michael McGee, Lal Lindley, Wellington Marcus, Munir Amlani, Mari Nekar, and Marika Kuyechin.